A Supreme Court ruling on immigration. Next. And welcome to the Stan Simpson Show, a program about Connecticut people and compelling issues, making a point to drop in every week. The Supreme Court has amended a controversial immigration law in Arizona and reaffirmed that federal law takes precedence over state in protecting the rights of suspected illegal immigrants. The Supreme Court verdict came days after President Obama enacted an executive order to protect the status of young illegal immigrants who've been living productive lives in the U.S. Today we'll talk with attorneys Reese Norris and Isaias Diaz about the two immigration measures and what that means. We'll also get some final thoughts on the child molestation convictions of former Penn State assistant coach Jerry Sandusky. But first, a big Supreme Court ruling, not the one everybody expected, right? They were thinking about the health care, and that didn't come down, but this immigration ruling came down in Arizona. Your reaction? They basically reaffirmed that the feds have the sort of higher authority to rule on this. But what was your reaction overall to this verdict?
I thought it was
the
ruling was an interesting ruling. I mean, I think it gave both sides something that they were looking for. Certainly, Arizona was happy that they upheld the portion that they could stop and identify individuals regarding their legal status. But Arizona feels very disappointed, obviously, in the other portions of their law being overturned.
By the way, you are Reese Norris, defense attorney. Isaias Diaz, who's the chairman of the Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs Commission. Sorry to introduce you guys, but you're famous faces in Connecticut. So what it did do, it reaffirmed the right for police to stop and detain if there's suspicion, but it took away the ability to call it a crime if you did not carry registration if they stopped you, right, if you're undocumented. And it's no longer a crime if you are working and don't have documentation. It's not a crime. So at the end of the day, did Arizona still win here because you can still stop people who police suspect to be illegal? Is that going to open up racial profiling concerns?
Well, that's actually one of the Commission's primary concerns, is that even though the law has these safeguards in it, the fourth provision that wasn't struck down has three safeguards. The first being that there's a presumption that you're in the country lawfully if you can produce an Arizona driver's license. Second being that they can't base their reasonable suspicion of you being in the country unlawfully based on your race, color, or ethnicity. Right. And then third being that it can't conflict with any existing federal law. Those aside, I still have some concerns in the manner in which it could be implemented, because what justifies a stop for someone? You may stop someone for jaywalking, you may stop somebody for blowing a stop sign or having their blinker out, for example. So one of my primary concerns is even though the law may on its face seem constitutional, it can still lend itself to abuse based on the implementation, kind of like what we saw in East Haven. Right,
and many are saying it's a win for the government and for the Obama administration. Some are saying it's a win for Arizona for the very same reasons you outlined. And here's Arizona Governor Jan Brewer on her thoughts post-ruling.
It's a victory for the rule of law, and it is a victory for the people of Arizona and for America and for the 10th Amendment.
Some may say it's a little bit of damage control right now. But at the end of the day, though, the big concern here is that you can stop someone if they suspect. Although if you read the wording of the court, they're saying they're willing to take a look at that. If there are complaints or concerns, they're willing to revisit that clause. Your thoughts on that?
And I think that's exactly it. If in fact it's applied in a discriminatory fashion, the reference was made to East Haven, then I think the Supreme Court or other courts are going to say, no, this is no good. Yeah. So I think the application is key.
They almost telegraphed their punch here and reading their wording. They're almost pretty much saying they're not real comfortable with this and that they're open to looking very hard if indeed they get complaints. What are your thoughts on what will happen here? What will be the next 2, 3, 4 years? What will play out, you think, here?
Well, I think the first thing that the Supreme Court wanted to do was give the states an opportunity to interpret a certain provision in the law, that being what is considered a reasonable inquiry. And there's some language built in that makes the inquiry into their immigration status mandatory. However, it's one thing if you're stopping somebody for you know, jaywalking or breach of the peace versus someone being arrested for a felony. And those are two very different circumstances where one person would, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, and then after that it would be unreasonable to continue to detain them in order to determine their immigration status. Whereas if somebody's arrested anyway for a serious offense and they're going to be there all night anyway, and you're running a search for 5 or 6 hours, again, the language is going to be what is considered a reasonable inquiry.
Right.
And they're allowing the state courts to have the first bite at the apple to see if they can deal with that battle ahead of time.
And again, you're chairman of the Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs Commission. What are they thinking? What is a better way to do this? This has been bandied about for years. What are your thoughts and solutions?
Well, my thoughts and solutions, I think, is that we just need an overhaul of the immigration system as a whole, and it's not just a Republican or Democrat thing. I think it's safe to say that the last 4 administrations have failed at restructuring immigration law. We need some solid mechanism that for people who desire to be in this country lawfully to get in, so that they can enter the country through the gate and not over the wall, so to speak.
Reese Norris, any thoughts on immigration? Now, you're a criminal defense attorney, but what are your thoughts? You're a guy with broad interests.
I find it fascinating because, unfortunately, it seems to be a political football. You mentioned the edict from President Obama, and obviously the one that followed the decision was significant. And the question is, that's temporary. And I agree that we need a permanent solution. And I think, you know, Senator Marco Rubio had clearly proposed something of the legislative nature. And I think that's much more important than a presidential edict that I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that.
Why? Why is that more important, you think?
Because it's long-lasting. It's going to be legislative. It's going to be subject to Congress's vote, and it'll be enforceable because the president is taking a short-term thing. It's not long-term. And I think everyone involving immigration wants something long-term so they can look down the line and have some foreseeability of what's going to happen.
Was it politically expedient right now? I mean, this coming at a time that it has. Who does it help? The president or does it help the Republican? Who does ruling help right now? Does it inflame feelings on certain sides of the political aisle?
I think on both sides of the aisle it is inflamed. And I feel, in some respects, sorry for people in Arizona because they feel that they haven't been protected, and they feel that the federal government has a responsibility to protect that citizenry, and it's just not happening. And Governor Brewer has said that. She feels that you know, the president has taken a position slapping them in the face.
And East Haven, again, you guys mentioned, provides an interesting platform. What can happen when you have police officers running unchecked? What happens there now? What's the latest? Is a new police chief out there? Are you guys still monitoring what's happening in East Haven? Any thoughts on what can happen there to change that culture?
Well, I think based on the last backlash and the attempts that both sides of the political aisle made to try to rectify and remedy the past situations have been very successful. People are coming across and talking now, and with regards to East Haven, there hasn't been any recent outcries. Right. I would have been the first to know.
But getting a clean house a bit, right? They're starting with the top, and you can suspect the other officers will be coming in new, so some fresh faces will go a long way, it seems like.
Right, and I think that also the people who enforce the laws are aware that there's community watchdogs now, and people are not going to remain silent. But even more so, now there's some sort of recourse, because you can't get away with it. Like before, it was swept under the rug. Now it's not going to be swept under the rug anymore. So people have a sense of security now.
Isaias Diaz, Reese Norris, Norris and Diaz, the law firm. Just for that merger, you guys should merge. When we come back, folks, Norris and Diaz will continue our talk, this time on the DREAM Act and President Obama's move to protect the status of young illegal immigrants living productive lives in the U.S. Remember, catch the show 24/7, ctnow.com/stand. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Don't go away.